I am very excited to talk about this course and to let you hear from Evan about what he's thinking about the course. I'm going to start with explaining why we decided this year for the first time ever to do a Penn and Washington course on campus. So first, with the pandemic, we actually opened up our Penn and Washington courses to people who were taking other courses on campus or whatever. And I talked to a lot of students who are really grateful for that opportunity because for whatever reason, their schedule didn't let them spend a whole semester in DC. So they were just thrilled to have the chance to do that. And I thought having a course on campus would, sort of speak to that need a little bit. I also talk a lot with the SNF Paideia folks, and their courses are really all about, dialogue across difference. And that's really what Penn and Washington is about too. So I kind of got excited about being part of, sort of their course offerings. And then finally, I guess almost personally after January 6th, I really thought that, this is a moment that we need to be talking about. It's a really important topic, both the future of the Republican Party, but really more broadly political ideology and what your ideology is, and, giving you a chance to think about that a bit more deeply. So that's why we're doing on campus. And the most important element of this is that Evan and I have known each other for a few years. And when I first started thinking of this, I thought the only way I can do this is if Evan co-teaches. And I'm really just feel very grateful that he's agreed to do that. So Evan, what I thought we would do is just ask you a couple of questions about the course. And then maybe we can take some questions from students, and I can pipe in every once in a while. Which, by the way, is practically, how our course meetings will go. So this is all a good example of what's in store. So let's just start with a very quick bio, because obviously you're going to do more of that in class, but.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And as we get started here, I just want to apologize to the students who are with us and to those who will join later for my sparse surroundings and background and suboptimal lighting. I was telling Deirdre before we started that I'm in the middle of a move. So my basement office here has not yet been completely set up in my future place. So apologize for that, but I'm excited to talk about this and excited for the opportunity to co-teach this course, which I think will be very exciting. But by way of bio, for those who may not have heard of me or my efforts, I'll be very brief about that. But originally, I'm from Utah. I attended university here, Brigham Young University. Was recruited by the CIA while in school here, studying international studies. I then went through clandestine operations training and was shipped off overseas soon after 9/11, and then served in various conflict and war zones in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East for the next several years, running covert, traditional and counterterrorism covert operations. After I completed my service, I was lucky enough to attend grad school at Penn. I did an MBA at the Wharton School, went off to banking for a couple of years in San Francisco with Goldman Sachs. And while I was out there, an opportunity suddenly arose to return to Washington and be a senior advisor to the Foreign Affairs Committee while it was under the leadership of Chairman Ed Royce, who was a very senior Republican congressman from California. I did that for a couple of years. I oversaw U.S. foreign policy and the funding for it in the Middle East and North Africa, and worked on a range of national security issues for the committee, advising the chairman and other members of Congress on those issues during that period. I was then asked to come up and be the chief policy director for the House Republican Conference, working with leadership on all manners of foreign and domestic policy. I did that for about a year and a half. During my time there, Donald Trump started rising through the primaries, and I was opposed to him and his rise and his candidacy and his rhetoric and all of that, and advised members of Congress to stay away. Obviously, they didn't take my advice on that front, most of them, and you know, the rest is history. But I eventually left that position in August, on August 8th, to be precise, 2016, to launch my own emergency independent conservative presidential run, something I never imagined I would do. I was part of an effort to try to recruit some other conservative to challenge Trump in the general election, because I felt it was important that someone from the right make a stand for founding American principles and for a variety of other important things, for our institutions, for our norms, for our democracy, ultimately. Ultimately, no one else would do that, including, you know, many, you know, former generals and, you know, former presidential candidates and senators and, you know, titans of industry. Ultimately, no one would do it. So in the end, I decided I would do it myself. Ran for a brief 3-month period. Was a very modest campaign. I was, you know, an unknown person at that time. Had spent my time behind, you know, out of the limelight, sort of advising and assisting others politically. You know, but in the end, we had the best non-major party outcome or electoral result in any state since Ross Perot. And it was, you know, therefore one of the historically better results electorally for a non-major party candidate in US history. Though that wasn't actually ultimately our realistic goal. Our modest realistic goal was simply to stand for principles that were fundamental, we believe, to our country and to the health of the Republican Party. And so that's what our goal was. But you know, Donald Trump was elected. That surprised us. We thought for sure that Hillary Clinton would prevail. And so we, you know, were expecting a fight for the heart and soul of the Republican Party at that point. But given that Trump had won, it became clear that there was something more serious at stake, and that was the survival of American democracy. So I spent the next 4 years building the democracy movement. I started an organization called Stand Up Republic, which unified Americans from across the political spectrum around our founding ideals and norms and institutions, around truth, around equality and liberty, these things. And we fought for American democracy for 4 years under the Trump administration, and were able to deal a number of blows to his closest allies in Congress, whether it was Steve King or Dana Rohrabacher or Roy Moore and others, and ultimately to him in 2020, mobilizing a cross-partisan coalition to defend American democracy. So since the election, obviously we all remember, it's still relatively fresh on our minds, the January 6th insurrection. That created a situation which we hoped for in 2016, which was an opportunity to have a debate within the Republican Party about its direction, about what conservatism really was and should be. And it just, you know, that was an opportunity that came to us 4 years later after a long fight for American democracy. But now that's the situation in which we find ourselves, and that is a growing number of Republicans wanting something different, although still a minority in the party, but a growing number. And now what we have is a situation in which many people have described what's happening in the Republican Party, a civil war. I think that overstates it a bit, but certainly the insurrection on January 6th has given oxygen and opportunity to a debate about the direction of the Republican Party and even the meaning of conservatism, so much so that there are some, which I'm a part of, who are actively considering starting a new faction or even a new party altogether, or something in between, that will that will represent the ideals that we know are critical to our country, and also strengthen it for the future. In fact, we're doing more than considering that. We're actively working on that. And so that's why this course comes at such an opportune time.
All right. Could you talk a little bit more about that? You're a wildly busy guy. So what motivates you to teach this course?
Well, I mean, Deirdre, you know that one of my favorite things to do is to work with students, and so I think that's the main driver. The reason why I enjoy that is that, I find that whether I'm speaking to a senior class in high school or to college students or grad students, that students are more tend to be more driven uh, by what's right and what makes practical sense. And that's where our politics, I think, need to be. And over time, people who engage in politics, they develop their own personal interests and their own grudges, and the interest of the country too often fall behind. And I think that's, simplistically stated, a big part of the problem that we find ourselves in on the Republican side, on the conservative side, and then as a result in the country as a whole. And so I enjoy dealing with, working with students who haven't yet been sort of corrupted by personal financial interests or grudges against the other party, and rather have an open mind and have the expectation that that we'll simply do what's right and what's practical. And in addition to that, students, especially these days, are bringing new ideas to the table, fresh thinking, and frankly, selfishly, I benefit from that too. So I think that there's an opportunity to sort of share the inside, share an inside view into this struggle for American democracy, and through the lens of a principled conservative or principled conservatism, and also sharing that, but also learning from students about how they're thinking about the future of the country, and how different ideas may lead it forward or backward.
So let me follow up on that part. We've talked about how some of the assignments and some of the conversations that you have might actually be useful to you and to your colleagues as you're developing sort of new ideas and new directions. What is it about this fall? Where do you think you'll be this fall? Let's get out your crystal ball. Where do you think you'll be this fall? What kinds of conversations do you think we'll be having?
I think by the fall, we will have, those of us who are working on creating a new faction, and in some states it may actually be formally organized as a new party, we will have become public with our policy views on matters of great concern to the country. We will have created a brand for that effort. We will be, we'll have united grassroots and grass tops from, certainly from the disaffected right, from the principled right, but even beyond that, in the center of American politics, and even on the left. We think, the things that we fight for are that powerful that they can unite people across the political spectrum. We will be actually working on campaigns at that point. It'll still be a little bit early for 2022, but there will be campaigns and candidacies in 2021. You look at for example, the Virginia gubernatorial race, that may be one of the biggest, where you'll see a radicalizing Republican Party up against likely a mainstream Democrat. And there's a lot to be learned for the country. We'll probably be engaged in that and other races and preparing for 2022, and that will include primary battles in which we're supporting principled Republicans, and it'll include, preparing for general election contests in which we're supporting unifying Democrats over extremist Republicans. And so we'll be really, by then it'll still be early somewhat in the 2022 cycle, but not that early. I mean, things will be pretty hot and pretty active at that point. And we'll be in the thick of it already on the campaign side, I think.
So this is a great opportunity for conservatives, obviously, but why would a non-conservative take this class?
I think it may even be more interesting for a non-conservative, to be honest. I mean, I think it'll be interesting for both, don't get me wrong. But in politics, first of all, it's always good to be challenged, right? It's always good to have your views challenged, because frankly, it just makes your views or your ability to defend your views stronger. But more important than defending your views, it'll give you an insight into at least the principled side of republicanism or conservatism, which obviously has been, quite damaged over the past 4 years, especially, although it began a long time before that, which is something we'll talk about in the course. But I think it'll help you if you find yourself on the liberal or progressive side of the political spectrum. Understanding the other side, I think, helps you make a more persuasive argument when your persuasive arguments when you're trying to bring others along. And there is common ground actually between the right and the left, the center right, center left, far right, far left. There are areas of common ground, and when you understand those, then you can figure out how to compete more effectively against your opponents, but also how to find how to help find solutions to the major challenges that the country is facing. I think in addition, the right is going through a real time of change and peril right now. I mean, the Republican Party could continue to drift further to the right and to radicalize beyond what we've already seen, including the insurrection on the 6th. It could further head down that road, and other countries have seen that in time. It happens, and we have to guard against that and fight against that. But it could also, I think it's hard and will take a lot of work, and maybe it isn't possible in the near term. We just don't know. But it's also possible that the Republican Party could go in the other direction. And so I mention that because I think the Democratic Party will also face challenges, within its own ranks in the next decade, probably. And they'll look different than those that the Republican Party faces now. But there will be, both parties are very old, and they have lots of legacy ideas and relationships and traditions. Both parties probably need a refreshing, and that always comes with a political fight, with a political contest. And so some of the things that we're going through now and sort of restating what we stand for and what we don't stand for, and who's welcome in the party and who should not be, and how to organize as a growing minority within the party to eventually capture it or replace it. These are all things that, regardless what the party is, there are certain strategies and tactics that we'll be using that will be useful for anyone looking to build political influence and power in a very dynamic circumstances, which is the kind that we certainly face on the right, but I think we face generally in the country and on the left and in the Democratic Party as well.
That's a great point. It reminded me of, this is years ago now, one of the first meetings that we had with you with a semester cohort, and there was one girl in particular who's super progressive, and there you are, just very calmly talking about what you believe, and her head was going to explode. Like she was really uncomfortable sort of having that conversation. And actually, I kind of thought it was a very good thing for her to be uncomfortable, because it makes you think about, like, first of all, this guy is actually not Satan. He's a thoughtful person who I could have a conversation with. And it's important to be reminded that you're making a lot of assumptions maybe about, sort of what the other side is, and that you need to rethink that sometimes. And just to be more clear about what it is that you believe is, I think, a helpful part of the process.
Hopefully her head was exploding because I was saying things that she didn't expect a conservative to say, not because I was saying things that she found offensive.
I don't know. She wasn't at all offended. I think she was just very uncomfortable with sort of being in that conversation. If you always stay in your own, tribe, and you think the other tribe are idiots, then you can't have a sort of a decent conversation. So
It's so true, and I'll say that I've been in those uncomfortable conversations too, and had times where I've been uncomfortable, and I certainly understand that. But the last 4 years have forced me to work harder to find common ground with people across the political aisle. And let me tell you, after you do it a little bit, you realize that we've got a lot in common. And we start with principles, and then we that we a lot of the times agree on, and then we sort of have a debate. Okay, and even we often agree on the goal, like this is what we want, how do we, and then we debate on how best to achieve it. But I think that there's we're often led to believe in today's politics that there's more that divides us than unites us. And unifying leaders on both sides of the aisle, especially over the last 4 years, have said otherwise. And President Biden has said that. I think I've heard Barack Obama say that as well. I think I've heard former President Bush say that. It's true. It's not political pablum. It's true. We have far more in common than in difference, although certainly there are important differences. But understanding that political landscape is really a part of maturing politically and becoming an effective political leader or operator, whichever you choose to be.
so let's get to the nuts and bolts. What is this class going to actually look like? What are we going to be doing?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to first and foremost talk a little bit about the current situation. Where do we find ourselves? I mean, we've just had this terrible insurrection, which in my mind was a 9/11 magnitude event. I think we'll only in years to come really fully recognize what that was. But it was a sitting president leading a violent insurrection against our democracy in order to hold on to power illegitimately. I mean, it is every bit exactly that. And I think we're still understanding it, and it'll take historians to capture that probably before we fully acknowledge that for what it was. But we all know even now that it was a terrible, terrible thing, a threat to our democracy. And so I think we have to take stock of where we are today. Where is extremism on the right? What are its modern, current, contemporary manifestations? Who are those fighting against it from within the party? What are the competitive dynamics electorally? I think we've got to start there. But then I think we back up quite a bit and talk about where conservatism comes from. What is conservatism? How did it form? What does it mean? There are different opinions about what it is and what it means, obviously, especially now. But let's unpack that. Let's talk about, let's read some of the most important writings that formed the conservative thought and philosophy. Let's explore the origins of it. Then I think we need to look at where it went after after it came to be. What happened with the Southern strategy? Why did the party of Lincoln end up working so hard to suppress minority votes in the modern time? What happened, and exploring that I think is very, very important. Then I think we have to explore how Donald Trump's rise and how the party leaders who knew better succumbed to his influence and to his movement and joined it. I think it's important to understand how that happened, because it's understanding how people who were previously thought of by many as relatively principled or somewhat principled, how they could buy into such a destructive, in my view, evil movement to destroy our democracy, knowing the danger that it presented. So I think we have to go there. But beyond that, I think that's sort of backward looking. I think it's important to understand how we got here. But then I think it's important to look at the current struggle for the future of the Republican Party. What is the struggle? Where are the fault lines? Who are the players involved? where are there dangers and opportunities. Then I think we have to get into, what a healthy Republican Party or a healthy conservatism built for the future, not the past, looks like. And that's where I think there's going to be a lot of good thinking done by students in the class, and a lot of creative sort of political thinking, knowing what we'll know then about conservatism. I think we should, we'll have the opportunity to build, to reconsider a variety of policy issues, and to think to ourselves, okay, how can we craft a policy on this issue, say healthcare, that is both conservative, but that meets our national needs? And that's a very exciting thing, because if you can find those two things, if you can build a policy on healthcare or taxes or whatever it is that meets sort of the ideological requirements of a principled conservatism, even newly defined, then you can, and that works practically, then you're in a position to really to offer a solution to the country that is unifying and therefore lasting. And so there's like that's something that too often policymakers in Washington, an exercise they don't go through, but it's one that we will in this class. And it would be wonderful if there were another class like this about progressivism, and that hopefully conservative students would attend that. I'm not holding my breath on that one, but they should. And so, but anyway, I think we'll get into that. I think because this struggle for the future of the Republican Party and conservatism, and therefore the country, will be ongoing. We'll have a variety of guest speakers who will come in, and yes, to talk specifically about the history of this, both distant and near, but also the current struggle for the future of the Republican Party. And we'll have incredible guest speakers who are right in the thick of it, sitting members of Congress, well-known leaders in this space, coming to speak with the students, to hear from them and share their views of what's happening. So, I think also I'd love for, I would love for there to be collaboration between the students on some of these things. And I'd love for there to be a forum in the class, and we're planning for this, in which students will be able to share their ideas, perhaps choosing, one policy or another, or, a handful, and articulating what they think could be a modern conservative view on a certain policy issue, or even offering a more fully baked political or policy solution to a major challenge facing the country. I think it'll be a very exciting discussion.
Cool. Before we open up to questions, if anybody has questions, so we've talked a lot about, sort of what we're thinking about this class in particular, and you just talked about guest speakers and the assignments and the kinds of activities in class, and that really lines up with what a Penn and Washington course is. We're very much designing this to be a Penn and Washington course. So it's much more practical. It's much more current affairs focused. You're not likely to read a lot of academic papers. There may be a little bit of, sort of the theory or the first thinkers or that kind of stuff, but, much more likely it's long form journalism or short form journalism, from people who are doing a lot of hard thinking right now about this topic. The assignments are usually in a Penn and Washington course more typical of the work that you would actually do in Washington. In this case, it's going to be really interesting to do some sort of big thinking and come up with a platform maybe, or, come up with sort of some of these big, sort of principles that will be useful to you and will be useful to this, sort of going forward to this movement. I will be editing all of your writing very, very heavily. Being a good writer in Washington is super important. So, that's part of the Penn and Washington experience too. And then, this may be a one-shot deal, and this is the only course you ever take that's anything like it, and you don't have any plans to go to Washington, and that's absolutely fine. If you do have, get excited and want to go to Washington, we're here to help you do that. And we take a very active role in connecting you to people and giving you advice and, supporting you whatever way we can. That's very much, sort of what Penn and Washington does. So, so that'll be wrapped up into this course as well.